There for Care is brought to you by CareScout, with the goal of sharing real-life conversations about aging care. Views expressed on this program are the speaker's own. We don't provide medical, legal, tax, financial, or other professional advice. Always talk to your own professional advisors for advice tailored to your needs. Today's guest is Melissa Hagerman, Executive Vice President of Human Resources at Genworth.
Loneliness is a big deal for someone who is a caregiver. We were shocked to find out that 72% of our workforce identify themselves as caregivers. And I think the most challenging thing about that scenario is really trying to understand how you can help without making the caregiver feel like you're invading their privacy. Oftentimes, caregivers don't take care of themselves, and so offering services at the workplace that they can capitalize on could be very helpful.
So if somebody is looking for ways that they can better support their caregivers, what's some advice that you might have?
So when you think about the three legs of the stool, the financial well-being, emotional well-being, and physical well-being, all of those need to work together. And so make sure you're thinking about all of those levers holistically. And I would say for employers and associates, if you can get there and have those conversations and just be honest and open, you can work toward getting to a solution much faster.
Hi, welcome to the There for Care podcast by CareScout, a podcast all about aging care, whether you're navigating it for yourself or for your loved ones. Today's episode is about caregiving in the workplace. I'm Amy Rein, and we're talking with Melissa Hagerman, the Chief Human Resources Officer for Genworth and CareScout. Melissa had her own caregiving experience watching her father care for her mother as she experienced Alzheimer's. And she's really brought that experience into her own leadership style, as well as how she thinks about providing for caregivers in the workplace. So with that, Melissa, I was thinking we probably need to start at the beginning. Tell us about what happened with your mother and your father with her experience with Alzheimer's, his as a caregiver, and then yours as a child as they're navigating that experience.
Yeah. So my father was the primary caregiver for my mother. She was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and my siblings and I did not live in the area that they were in. So it became very challenging to understand what was happening. My father was a very proud and stoic man. He was a World War II Marine veteran who had a lot of pride, and for him, being able to take care of her was very, very important. And protecting her and her privacy was also very important, but it made it really challenging for my sisters and I, because we weren't right there to really understand what was happening.
So can you tell us a little bit about some of the emotions you experienced sort of going through that? Because I know you mentioned, that protecting that he was doing, and as someone who cares deeply about your parents and as you're trying to help as much as you can from where you are, what was that like?
I think the most challenging thing about that scenario is really trying to understand how you can help without making the caregiver feel like you're invading their privacy. That's really tricky. You want to make sure that you're there for them, supporting them, caring for them, offering guidance and support, but recognize that there's a boundary that you don't want to step over out of respect for them, especially when it comes to parents or grandparents. In my case, this is my father. Mm-hmm. He was the one making all the rules while I grew up. And now me having to step in and say, no, we should really do it this way. That's challenging. That's challenging to go through.
Yeah. So how did that experience watching your father care for your mother and all of those dynamics you talked about inform who you are as a leader?
So all of our experiences really help establish who we are as people and leaders. We take all of our experiences and everything we go through in life, and we decide, is this something that I can turn into something positive, or is this something that I'm going to let get the better of me? And going through the experience of watching my mother suffer with Alzheimer's and watching my father who was also struggling with some health issues, take care of her, I think gave me the fortitude and the drive to want to figure out a way to do something better. All of those experiences weigh into who we become as leaders. And in my role, it has been incredibly impactful to be able to use those experiences as I think about the empathy that's needed when we're caring for associates and a workforce that is also struggling with their own issues. So I would say empathy was a big lesson learned for me. Patience, understanding, listening skills, all of those things were big takeaways from the experience that I had.
Can you maybe talk a little bit about, what that sort of compassion and empathy looks like as a leader, right? If you're, you've got sort of that policy end of things, but then you have those interpersonal interactions. What are some of the ways that that's sort of manifested in your journey?
Empathy as a leader means really being able to put yourself into the situation that the person is going through. And you can't get there until you really listen and until you really put yourself and allow yourself the vulnerability to go there. Being a strong leader sometimes means that you don't have all the answers, but that you just have to be there to offer support and guidance. And in my role, it's important for me to understand that our associates all have their own unique situations. They're all individuals, and coming up with solutions, whether that be benefits related solutions, whether that be financial solutions, there's different needs based on the circumstances.
Yeah, I see it. I hear a lot of analogs to your own experience, like some of the things you were saying about those dynamics with your parents and that listening and that understanding, but then also understanding that there are privacy and giving people their space. There's a lot of those parallels in how you think about your work as well. So sort of turning away from your personal experience and more to just the state of caregiving in the workplace today. The Employee Benefits Research Institute did a workplace wellness study in 2023 that found that nearly 25% of the workforce is caring for at least one adult or child with special needs, an average of 21 hours a week. And that's on top of the 40 plus that many of them are working in full-time jobs. So what is it important from your perspective for employers to know about caregivers at work?
Yeah, that's so important. I would say the first thing that we need to understand is what we're dealing with. So we recently asked our associate population, are you caregivers? This is not something that many employers do. And we were shocked to find out that 72% of our workforce identify themselves as caregivers. And that's pretty significant when you think about it. So the first step is really understanding what you're dealing with. You can't fix something unless you can put your hands around it. So that's really imperative. The other piece is making sure that you understand and you're realistic about the toll that it takes on the workplace. And that's not just the emotional toll, but that is when you think about being able to be there and do your job, the focus that's needed that you're just not able to do when you're a caregiver and you're juggling multiple balls at the same time. So I think it's first understanding what the number of caregivers you have in your workforce is, and then being able to come up with the right levers to pull to provide them the relief they need.
Yeah. So if somebody in a similar position to you at a company is looking for ways that they can better support their caregivers, what's some advice that you might have for similarly situated leaders?
So I would say the first thing that I would recommend is to create feedback loops. Find ways that you can be out there and asking the questions so that you can come up with the right solutions. That would be my first step. We also have done a lot in the space of creating not just financial resources available for our associates, but also emotional resources and physical. So when you think about the three legs of the stool, the financial well-being, emotional well-being, and physical well-being, all of those need to work together. And so my advice to employers would be make sure you're thinking about all of those levers holistically and finding ways for each of those to connect with your workforce.
What's some of the more innovative or your favorite offerings that you've seen out in the world as far that to support caregivers in the workplace?
I'm very proud of the services that we've provided, but I know many organizations also provide EAP. That's very important.
What's that stand for?
Employee assistance programs are very important. Respite care for caregivers is also a very important offering that needs to be considered. Financial literacy programs.
Can you talk a little bit about the financial literacy and why that's important?
Yeah, the cost of caregiving is crippling, quite frankly. And helping associates understand how to navigate the cost and where to go for guidance and get the resources they need when they're struggling is incredibly impactful and very helpful. I would say that is definitely one that I would encourage employers to really think hard about how they can offer that. Another resource is on-site wellness clinics. Oftentimes, caregivers don't take care of themselves and their physical, medical, emotional needs. And so offering services at the workplace that they can capitalize on could be another offering that could be very helpful.
Yeah, I'm sure that the convenience factor, right, of not being another place you have to go or a thing that you have to do, it is just part of your day can make a really big difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you make sure that associates know about these offerings? Because, to your point, they don't have a lot of extra attention. They're very busy. What are some suggestions you have in getting the word out?
It starts with psychological safety. It starts with making sure the culture of the organization is one where people feel safe to ask questions, where people know who their contact resources are when they need help and they're not embarrassed or afraid to ask. It also is important to find different ways to communicate. So not just relying on an email.
Mm-hmm.
It's finding ways through video boards or through flyers or mailings. There's lots of different ways to communicate and making sure that people hear it from multiple sources is important.
Yeah. And we've talked a lot over the series of podcasts that there's this recurring theme of, open communication, right? And just making it normal and, very expected that this is an experience that many of us have and that we need to work together to work through it. So it's coming through in this conversation as well. So flipping to the other side of that question, how would you advise someone that's looking for a company or trying to find ways that the company they currently work for can better support their caregiving needs?
It's really important to work for a company that understands the importance of the person as a whole and is willing to put the time and energy into understanding what their needs are as a person, not just an associate. Finding the right organization that aligns with who you are as a person is really important for everyone, but it's critically important for caregivers. They're already under pressure, enormous pressure. And if they can find an employer who will spend the time to help them navigate these challenges it's definitely a win-win. One of the things that's really important to me is the concept of customer centricity and making sure that we are providing our customers the very best care and service that they well deserve. But I also feel wholeheartedly that we can't get there until we are providing and role modeling that same level of care to our workforce. And so as an employer, if someone is looking to find a company, I would say make sure it's a company that is aligned with who you are as a person and is willing to invest in you.
So if you are already at a company and you are like millions of Americans where a caregiving need has just sort of appeared in your life and maybe you didn't plan for it, you weren't necessarily on the hunt for an employer that was super friendly to caregivers, how would you recommend they advocate for what they need to play both roles of caregiver and associate successfully?
My suggestion would be find someone in the organization that you trust, whether that's someone within the human resources function or a manager, and have the conversation about what's important to you at this point in time and what your needs are, and just start the conversation. My biggest takeaway in reflecting back on watching my father care for my mother was the importance of being honest about what's going on and having that conversation about the realities of what we're facing. And that's really, really hard to do. And I think if I could have a do-over, I would have done more of that. Mm-hmm. And I would say for employers and associates, if you can get there and have those conversations and just be honest and open, you can work toward getting to a solution much faster.
Yes. Thank you. So, thinking back about our conversation, like I said, that recurring theme of being open and honest, as well as the fact that just remembering that this is an increasingly common life experience that many of us have, and that you shouldn't feel alone, and that there are benefits, there are programs, there are just, people trying to help each other, ways to let you balance the needs that you have as a caregiver and as an associate. So any sort of final guidance that you might give to, maybe even outside of the world of caregiving in the workplace, that when you think about your own caregiving experience with your parents and the hundreds of employees, I'm sure at this point that through your HR career, you've personally helped sort of navigate these situations, any sort of parting advice that you'd give them?
So I think you hit the nail on the head when you said loneliness is a big deal for someone who is a caregiver. Can be very lonely. And so making sure that people feel cared for and that they have a support network is really, really important. I would also suggest that I have allowed myself the grace to learn from everything I went through. I try to live by every experience is an experience to learn from. And that has served me well. I don't always have the perfect answer, but I certainly will navigate the best I can and learn from each experience I have. And that would be the advice I would give.
Great. Thanks, Melissa. And thank you for joining this week's There for Care podcast by CareScout. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and share with all of your friends and loved ones that are navigating the caregiving journey as well. We'll see you next time.